and welcome to Infrastructure Matters, the podcast dedicated to exploring the dynamic world of infrastructure, asset management and public works. I'm your host, David Jenkins, Chief Executive of IPWEA. And in today's episode, we're diving into the future of Australia's construction industry, focusing on diversity, productivity and sustainability. Our special guest is Jon Davies, CEO of the Australian Constructors Association. We'll be discussing his organisation's strides to modernise the construction sector, including increasing female representation, enhancing productivity and developing sustainable practices. So please grab a cup of coffee, sit back and let's explore the innovative approaches reshaping the construction industry. And as always, stay tuned for an engaged conversation that promises valuable insights and practical advice. So, hello, welcome to Infrastructure Matters, and I'm delighted today that we've got Jon Davies, who's the CEO of the Constructors Association. And I think the last time we saw each other, Jon, was probably in a conference in Sydney, and that would have been about a year ago. But I've certainly, in my purview as the Chief Exec here, I've certainly noticed the great work that the Constructors Association has been doing, certainly over the last 2-3 years, and certainly the profile, I think, of the organisation has been raised considerably. So, Jon, thanks ever so much for taking the time. Maybe just for our audience, if you could just give us a quick sort of headline about the Constructors Association and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me. So the ACA has been around for 30 years. We actually had our 30th birthday party just a few weeks back now. And but a lot of people haven't really heard too much of it because for the majority of that time, it did its business behind closed doors. And it was actually known at one stage as a bit of an old boys club. And so 4 years ago, we made an attempt to do something about that. And one of the first things they did was change the composition of the board so that we strive for equal representation, male and female, on the board with all of our directors. And they also said, right, we're going to employ our first full-time CEO, and we're going to try to be far more vocal, far more out there, I suppose, in terms of our advocacy. And that's when I came on board. But in terms of our membership, we are not a big association. We only have 19 members, but what we say is those 19 members construct over 90% of all major infrastructure in Australia. So it's all the largest contractors in Australia. Yeah,
okay. And so there's a couple of big areas that we want to sort of delve into, but I think the first one is you talk a lot about, well, there's a couple of things, but let's take the first one in terms of diversity in the workforce and how that should or should not look like in the constructor sector. Maybe you could give us just a little bit about what you're doing to promote diversity within and why.
Oh, look, in the construction industry, women only make up 13% of our workforce. And if you look at blue collar, that dwindles down to 1 or 2%.
Yep.
And the best advertisement for diversity is the change that we've seen in our board since making that change that I talked about. And we have far different conversations, far better, more enriched conversations than we would otherwise. But also, I think the other issue that we have with the construction industry is seen as very adversarial. And I think one of the reasons why that is because it's so male-dominated. Yeah. So I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why it would be beneficial to increase the proportion of women in the industry. Whether, we're ever going to get to 50-50, I mean, that's probably highly unlikely. But certainly, should we be a whole lot better than 13%? Yes, we should. And we're doing a number of things around that. One of them is our involvement in the Construction Industry Culture Task Force, along with the governments of New South Wales and Victoria. Mm-hmm. And what that's trying to do is develop a standard, a culture standard to go into procurement to drive the changes in the culture of the industry, which should make it easier and more attractive for, amongst other things, for women to come into the industry. Yeah. But we're also, last year we came up with a pledge that our members, because the culture standards is a top-down approach, and there's reasons for doing that. I mean, one of the things that we identified through the culture task force is that the long, inflexible hours that are worked are one of the reasons that are stopping more women coming into the industry.
Yep.
So you say, okay, well, surely that should be an easy fix. We'll just all agree that we're not going to work more than 50 hours a week in our tenders and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But that would actually see us hauled in front of the ACCC if we did that. But there's nothing to say from a client perspective on my project, you're not going to work more than 50 hours. No one's going to stop you doing that. So that's where the culture standing comes in. But from a bottom-up approach, we've pledged a number of things. We've said that within 5 years, 75% of our members are going to be accredited by the Workplace Gender Equality Agency as employers of choice, which is really quite a stringent thing to achieve. We've already got a number of new members that have just already passed that and have taken that really seriously and going hard to achieve that. We have introduced flexible work plans on all of our projects. And also now we're just launching the final component of that pledge, which is an attract campaign, where unlike other industry campaigns, because there's a few of these around, we're actually targeting mid-career women into blue-collar roles.
Right. Okay. Yep. And what's been the success? You've said that you've already got members that are transitioning. Where do you see this going in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Look, I think there's going to be an increased focus on it because, I mean, the other reason, more basic reason, I think, why we need more women into the industry is that we're short of people in our industry.
Yeah.
And so, we're missing out on half the working population. Yeah. So I only see those efforts increasing.
And I'm glad you said that because that's the big problem, right? Capacity and capability. So we talk a lot about that, particularly in the local government engineering sector, but it's no different in your space as well. Sharing space has been no different. So, and you talk a lot about building capacity and capability and the importance of what is the Constructors Association doing? You've talked about some of the practical elements you're doing from a diversity perspective, but broadly around capacity and capability, how else are you looking to solve that issue?
Well, we're actually looking at it from a slightly different point of view. We're looking at it more not in terms of generating or training more people up or advocating to bring more people into the country, for example, which are obvious ways to address that particular problem. Yeah. We're saying, for sure, yes, there are solutions, but every other major jurisdiction around the world is chasing the same resources we are. So it's not as easy as just opening the borders and hoping that people are going to come in. Yeah. And then once they do come in, you've got that problem. Well, you've got to build. It's almost self-defeating because you've then got to build a whole bunch of infrastructure to cater for those people that you're bringing in. So what we are focusing on is how can we do more with the resources that we already have? So how do we get more productive? And there's huge opportunities for growth. If we got Oxford Economics to do some analysis for us on this. Excuse me. And what they said, what they identified was that if you look at productivity growth over the last 30 years, and these are all ABS statistics, the gap in productivity growth between construction and other major industries, mainly manufacturing, is 33%. And you go, well, what does that mean? If you take 33% of the gross value add for construction, the construction sector overall in Australia, so another ABS statistic, you get a number of $62 billion a year. That is the opportunity, the massive opportunity, if we could close that gap. But that opportunity doesn't just manifest itself in terms of dollars and cents. You can also look at that from a point of view of resources, of people. If we could close that gap, we would have no resource problem. We'd have no housing crisis. We'd be able to build everything we wanted to build and more.
So what's the barriers now and why? So, because the productivity, big word. So, and you've talked very articulately about some of the practical steps you're doing from a diversity point of view. So very practically, what are the steps to do to make this whole system more efficient and drive productivity?
Well, the good thing here is that there's no shortage of opportunities. Yep. We did a report at the back end of last year called Nailing Construction Productivity. And actually, the areas where we said there are, we put them in an appendix because we said we actually know all of this stuff. It's things like overly lengthy procurement processes that are just designed to give the illusion of value for money rather than actually delivering value for money. There are lengthy and overly burdensome design review processes. That's all in the white-collar space. In the blue-collar space, can we get more effective, more efficient at pouring concrete? Of course we can. A big barrier to that historically has been industrial relations. Now, potentially, there is an opportunity around that. But we just focused on the white-collar side of things. And we said, well, look, we know all these. We know how to become more productive. Why is it that we're not actually doing that?
Yep.
And when you look at it, there's actually a whole bunch of barriers to realizing them. So what we've said is that government, industry, and unions need to come together to create a strategy to remove those barriers. And what I'm pleased to say is that the Commonwealth listened to us on that, and specifically also the transport infrastructure agencies of the states listened to us, and together we are now working on drafting that national construction strategy with 4 key focus areas. One being on procurement. How can we drive change through procurement? And real focus there on frameworks to effectively measure and value for money in non-cost areas. There's a section on workforce and culture, and that's being led by New South Wales. There's a section on data, the importance of how do we actually measure stuff, because what gets measured gets done.
Yeah.
And at the minute we create all this data, but we don't do anything with it. So there's a section looking at that. And then the final piece is around innovation and modern methods of construction. And how do we increase the amount of innovation and modern methods of construction, things like off-site manufacture, for example. And so this piece of work started a couple of months ago and is due to be complete within this financial year.
Okay, and so let me pick you up on this. Let's go a little bit deeper, particularly around the procurement aspect. And I'm interested because our members, typically manage all local community infrastructure, water, and roads, road being the predominant one. So let's say we think about roads, all right? And some local governments are looking at trying to new innovative materials, right? I'm not an expert on this, but there is a whole lot of stuff out there around sustainable materials, new types of infrastructure materials. And they're scratching their head going, this is so hard because the procurement process is so difficult. And that's one of the barriers you talked about. So how do we overcome that? What does the procurement process look like in 2030?
So what we that's not that far away, is it? What we advocate is at the minute a lot of procurement is very prescriptive in terms of the specification. So if you look at this table, it will say that the wood's got to come from Brazil, it's got to be kiln dried for 10 weeks, and it's got to be covered with a certain laminate of a certain color. And you go, well, where's the innovation going to come from? Yeah. So can we move to specifications, keeping the table as an example, that says, basically, we want a table that can accommodate 6 people, that's a metre off the ground, and whatever else you want to put in there. Yeah. And then that gives the freedom then for innovation to come in, both innovation in terms of productivity, how things are put together, but also specifically and importantly, innovation in terms of things like embodied carbon, and how do we get better and reduce the embodied carbon of the stuff that we build. Yeah, okay. So we've taken an angle and we're talking more about natural assets, green infrastructure, when you're considering solutions. It doesn't always have to be hard grey infrastructure. We're doing quite a bit of stuff on that place. But it's more than that. Infrastructure net zero, you talk about embodied carbon, it's more than that. If we're looking to try and get a more sustainable world, it's more than just that. What else are you talking about in the world of, trying to drive sustainability and infrastructure net zero? So we've been working with a number of other industry associations around that. It's an interesting space, actually, because we set up a loose sort of coalition of a number of industry associations called Infrastructure Net Zero. Yeah. And the aim was basically to tell government what we expect of government in terms of giving us the clear direction about what they want. And while we were sort of getting ourselves organised and all the rest of it, amazingly enough, the government actually was ahead of the game. Yeah. And all of a sudden, and I've got to give credit here to Transport for New South Wales in particular, they led a piece of work around defining ways to reduce not just embodied carbon, all types of all scopes of emissions.
Yeah.
So now we are sort of saying, well, what is it that we are going to do out of all of this? And so what we're doing is looking at individual areas where we can develop strategy. So a best example would be we've just published some thought leadership around renewable diesel. The equipment that we use uses millions of litres of diesel, and it's also highly energy intensive. So it's not likely anytime soon that it can be electrified. I laughed the other day. There was a video on YouTube going around of this new piece of equipment that had been brought to site that was all electric, and it was plugged in, and the person that was videoing it followed the cable around right back to the back of the site where it was plugged into a diesel generator. So we're a little way away from being able to do the electric, but a way in between is to go for renewable diesel. And there's also an overlap there with renewable aviation fuels, but there needs to be the creation of a market here in Australia and a capacity to actually make the stuff here in Australia, which there currently isn't. Yeah. And that will need the government's help to create that opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Now we talk a lot. I mean, this is the premise of what we do in our educational programs, all around asset management, right? The importance of basically looking after your current assets, not all about new, but also looking after your current assets. From your perspective and your lens, how would you interpret that with your members, and particularly when it comes to procurement? And we talked about this briefly at lunch. So when you go out in procurement, you want a particular project done. Give us a little bit about the thinking there around procurement and getting these things done.
Yeah, look, what we would like to see, what we think is necessary, is a movement away from procurement based just on a focus on lowest price.
Yeah.
Our members would far more like to compete against each other on innovation and doing things differently and doing things better and providing better value for money more broadly than just that narrow focus on cost. And one element of that is the life cycle cost of a project. Yeah. Now, if you're just assessing a tender based on the cost to build, there's no incentive there for contractors to come up with innovation and changes in design that will result in lower operating costs, for example. So our members would love increased opportunities to provide innovative solutions around that, because they're all at the end of the day, they're made up of a whole bunch of engineers that like nothing better than to solve problems. Yeah. Give them a problem, they will come up with solutions for you. But the problem that we've had to date is that doesn't happen very often. Yeah. And usually then it just comes back to upfront cost again. Yeah. And there's no effort, because it is not always easy to make that valuation and assessment if you are taking into account life cycle cost as well. But I think we need to do more in that area.
So our members would work very closely with your member firms and obviously the construction partners. What advice would you give to get the very best out of the construction firm that you work with? And you just talked about some of them here, but what other tips would you give?
It's back to remember who you're dealing with. Yes, our members are, on the face of it, big multinational companies, but they're made up of a bunch of engineers, just like you and I, that want to solve problems. And they love opportunities to do that in a collaborative way. I mean, historically, again, and maybe generalizing a little bit here, but we have procured things on the basis that, here you go, this is what we want, prescriptive specification. Again, there's a whole bunch of risks in delivering this. We want you to take all of those, even though we know that you probably can't estimate how much they're going to cost. Yeah. And we want a lump sum price for you. And then we're surprised at the end of the day when we start having adversarial conversations on site because the risks come to pass, it costs more money, blah, blah, blah. we need to move forward and deliver things in a far more collaborative way. And that sounds very generalist as well. What does that mean? I think that means a more open conversation around, from a client side, as to what problems they're trying to solve. What is the asset there for?
Yep.
Or what are they trying to achieve?
Yep.
And a more open conversation around what are the difficulties in delivering that? What are the risks associated with that? And how together can we better manage those risks? Rather than that sort of real transactional approach, which is what we've seen historically.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's good. And just in sort of taking it slightly different angle, I've always considered the articles that you put out very measured in the approach with various different sort of issues. And I know that you've made some comments recently in the AFR just around the Productivity Commissioner's view on housing and infrastructure. Maybe just what could you just sort of highlight some of the issues that you found with what the Productivity Commissioner said? Why?
Well, I find it very bizarre for a productivity commissioner not to mention productivity as a solution to something. That was the first point that I made. Because what the commissioner was saying was that we have an issue at the minute more broadly where the amount of infrastructure we're being asked to deliver as an industry is just going up and up and up and up. And it never goes down. It's always increasing. As an industry, we're not dissimilar to everyone else in that you've got the old demographic time bomb, so that our workforce is reducing the amount of people that we have available to deliver this stuff, especially for us, because we, as an industry, rely more heavily than most on basically young men, which is that shrinking cohort. So that's why we need to, we've got all this stuff to do, which is what the Productivity Commissioner was saying, and he was specifically talking about housing, about how do we build more houses. Well, we've got to stop diverting resources off to deliver infrastructure. Well, no, I don't agree with that. A, I'm not sure that they're the same resources, but B, we shouldn't be looking at this as just a finite pool, a finite ability to deliver stuff. We need to be delivering more with the resources we already have.
One of the areas that our members are sort of getting to grips with is this whole thing around housing, right? So more houses need to be built. But obviously then there's all the services that are required to look after those houses, sewage, water, et cetera, et cetera. And the onus is then on very much local government to deliver that. So have you got some views on that? Where do you think that's all going to go?
Yeah, I think the problem with all of that stuff is it's not sexy, is it? It's just not. It's not like a nice big airport or a motorway. Well, I don't know, the motorways are sexy, but it doesn't have that same allure from a government point of view of a politician going out and cutting a ribbon on a sewage treatment works versus on an airport. So it's always up against that, but it is absolutely critical infrastructure. I mean, back to the Productivity Commissioner and the housing issue. It's no good building a whole bunch of houses if you can't connect them up to a sewer or you can't connect them up to pipe water or electricity or whatever it may be. And what I don't think we do is I don't think there's enough transparency about just how much of that work is out there, how much that needs to be done, and for that work to be appropriately prioritized. Yeah. Okay.
Now, Jon, just a little bit about you. I know you're a Middlesbrough man from the UK. I certainly know that. But what got you into the construction sector?
Oh, gosh. Well, Lego, ultimately. I think that's a common route for most people in the construction industry. Yeah. I've been in it from day dot. I started out, I had a pretty clear understanding of what I wanted to do probably from about 16, which makes it incredibly frustrating when I've got an 18, 20 and 22-year-old that still don't seem to understand what they want to do. So I started out, I did a degree in quantity surveying, worked for John Lang's in the UK before they famously went bust and Ray O'Rourke bought them for £1. But I've been very fortunate. I've had 2 stints in the Middle East, one in Abu Dhabi before Abu Dhabi was known about, and I then went back to Dubai just as the the government changed the law around property ownership, which was the blue touch paper, and then Dubai just went boom. And some time in Singapore and 17 years here. And so my background is contracts and commercial, so I'm from the industry, which is why I feel I'm able to talk about a lot of the stuff that I do. Some people say, you know, how do you churn out so much stuff? Well, it's almost like therapy for me now after so long in the industry to be able to, you know, put all this down in paper and come up with some solutions. So I'm actually I feel actually quite fortunate to be in a position to do that.
And so, and I said this at the start, I've certainly admired the work that you guys have done, certainly over the last sort of 3-4 years. But where do you see the Australian Constructors Association going in the next sort of 4 to 5 years?
Oh, that's a good question. We're trying to create coalitions and partnerships wherever possible, because I think what we've done for too long, our industry has suffered because it's a massive industry, but it's a highly interconnected industry. And we've tried to fix individual problems like let's solve this problem in the housing sector with tier 3 contractors or whatever it may be, where we need to take a more holistic view of our industry, and that means forming a grander coalition of interested stakeholders in improving the industry. But I actually think for all the industrial relations issues that have started to come out the last couple of months, we see that as a significant opportunity, not an opportunity to go in and say, like, let's cut wages and all the rest of it. No, absolutely not. No, we recognize the really important role that law-abiding unions have. And what we would like to see is government, unions and industry come together, take this opportunity that we have now to reframe our industry, to make it a far more sustainable in the broader sense of the word, where, you know, it's not a zero-sum game that it is at the minute. For me to win, you've got to lose. Everyone should be able to win. This is a fantastic industry. We need more people to come into it. We need to be seen as an industry of choice when we're competing again for all these resources. And I think we actually have a great opportunity to do that now, and that will be our focus for the next few years. Yeah,
perfect. John, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you ever so much for coming in, and I very much look forward to seeing what you do and continue to do with the Constructors Association. I think it's in very safe hands, but thank you again.
Thank you for the time.
And that brings us to an end of another episode of Infrastructure Matters. A big thank you to our esteemed guest, Jon Davies, for sharing his valuable insights on diversity, productivity, and sustainability in the construction industry. As always, to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope today's discussion has broadened your understanding of the challenges and opportunities in the construction sector. Be sure to stay tuned for future episodes as we continue to explore the ever-evolving world of infrastructure and public works. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review Infrastructure Matters on your favourite platform. Follow us on LinkedIn for more updates and exclusive content. I'm David Jenkins signing off, reminding you that in the realm of infrastructure, every detail matters.